Hi, this is Maggie Vires, and this is my exam 12 on Laus-borne relapsing fever. So, the cardiovascular system is an important network because it's responsible for circulating blood, nutrients, gases, and immune components throughout the body, and its main structures include the heart, arteries, veins, and capillaries. So, this system also supports immunity by transporting white blood cells and antibodies to the sites of infections. And blood-borne pathogens such as Borrelia recurrentis is the causative agent of Laus-borne relapsing fever. It's able to exploit the cardiovascular system for systemic spread. So in LBRF, which is Laus-borne relapsing fever, the spirochetes will circulate in the bloodstream and cause recurrent febrile episodes and systemic inflammation and complications like myocarditis or shock or organ failure. So, Laus-borne relapsing fever is historically significant because it's associated with war and famine and usually occurs in areas of overcrowding and poor hygiene. So, outbreaks cause devastating epidemics in Europe and Africa and the Middle East, and sometimes killing over half of the population. So, today it's largely confined to the Horn of Africa, and LBRF has appeared in Europe and reemerged, usually in populations that are arriving from endemic regions. So, the main focus of this case study is to understand how Borrelia recurrentis exploits the bloodstream to cause cardiovascular involvement and to cause relapsing fever. So this links directly to the cardiovascular system, and because the spirochetes are circulating and they will trigger systemic inflammation and endothelial damage and complications like we've seen before, like myocarditis, shock, and organ failure. So in this case study, I'm specifically talking about the Laus-borne relapsing fever, but I thought it was worth mentioning that there is also a tick-borne relapsing fever. So this disease usually occurs in areas of crowding, poverty, and poor hygiene to create the ideal body conditions for the lice infestation, which is the only confirmed vector is the Borrelia recurrentis. So, over time, it has been recorded that the disease traces back to Hippocrates, and the disease's persistence in the Horn of Africa, combined with recent migration cases, demonstrates its potential for resurgence in non-endemic areas. So, a little bit about the causative agent. The bacteria Borrelia recurrentis is a prokaryotic spirochet, and it's characterized by long, loosely coiled shape, and this helps facilitate movement through the viscous environments like the bloodstream. And unlike typical gram-negative bacteria, it doesn't really stain reliably with the gram stain, but structurally it shares features with gram-negative organisms, like ones with a double membrane. So, it possesses periplasmic flagella, which run along the length of the cell within the periplasmic space. So these flagella allow for the corkscrew motility, which is necessary for vascular dissemination. And it's directly related to cardiovascular manifestations of relapsing fever. And it also has linear chromosomes and plasmids, which contain the genes which are critical for antigenic variation, which is a driving mechanism in the recurring episodes of fever in the patients that are infected. So, Borrelia recurrentis is microaerophilic and heterotrophic, which means it relies entirely on nutrients obtained from its human host. And the dependence on the bloodstream explains its vascular tropism and why cardiovascular complications like myocarditis and shock are common in severe cases. But the bacterium's major virulence mechanism is antigenic variation of its variable major proteins, or VMP, and these periodically change their outer membrane lipoproteins and evades the host's immune responses, which can cause the main characteristic, which in relapsing fever. So additional proteins include complement binding molecules and Hep A, which protect the spirochete from lysis. So while the linear and plasmid-based genomes encode these factors and allows for rapid adaptation in the human host. So now I'm going to talk about about the disease. So this fever is a systemic infection caused by Borrelia recurrentis, and it's affected multiple organ systems. Its cardiovascular involvement is especially significant, with shock and myocarditis and high fever contributing to morbidity and mortality. And hematologic signs such as petechiae are common, while there's also hepatic and renal complications that will occur in severe cases. So neurological systems are also common but less frequent, but these include meningism and confusion. So this disease is usually defined by recurrent febrile episodes, which are separated by periods of remission. So these are directly linked to the bacterium's ability to evade the immune system through antigenic variation. And symptoms can vary, but the common ones include fever, chills, nausea, abdominal pain, and even vomiting. So each febrile attack usually lasts about a week, and untreated infections historically, they used to have extremely high fatality rates, but treated infections are rarely fatal. But pregnant women are highly at risk of miscarrying when they are infected. So now I'm going to talk about the transmission and epidemiology. So LBRF is a human-specific infection. So it's maintained between outbreaks through mild or asymptomatic carriers, and its primary vector is the body louse. So it feeds on infected blood and can transmit the spirochete to another host through scratching contaminated skin. And rarely blood contamination is seen, but in hospitals or other settings, it can transmit the infection. And head lice may carry the pathogen, but their role is not fully established. So the vector's biology and human behavior heavily influence transmission. So body lice will hide in clothing and move to humans for feeding, which makes crowding and poor hygiene and clothing sharing critical risk factors. But these conditions basically explain why LBRF outbreaks are historically linked to war and famine and refugee situations. So Borrelia recurrentis enters through skin or mucous membranes and by contact with contaminated louse material, and then it exits through the blood, which allows body lice to propagate infection. So Borrelia recurrentis enters through the skin or the mucous membranes, like we just seen, and susceptibility is highest in populations affected by war, displacement, poverty, personal hygiene, or women who are pregnant. And historically, it has caused tens of millions of infections in North Africa and the Middle East, and it also causes lots of epidemics. So today the disease remains endemic, basically staying in the Horn of Africa region with almost 1,000 annual reports of the disease. So now I'm going to talk about the pathogenesis. So the infection begins when Borrelia recurrentis is inoculated into the skin or mucous membranes by a louse. So this pathogen is highly motile due to its periplasmic flagella and allows it to move through the bloodstream and tissues very efficiently. So it can attach to endothelial and organ tissues, but it does not strongly adhere, which helps it avoid early immune detection. And the initial interaction with the host sets the stage for systemic dissemination, and rapid motility and bloodstream invasion are crucial for establishing the infection before the host immune system can create any effective response. Oh, I'm sorry about my cameo. I didn't know that was like that. Okay, a hallmark of LBRF is the relapse phenomenon, and this is caused by antigenic variation, like we've seen before, but this is caused by surface proteins. And as the immune system produces antibodies, the Borrelia recurrentis will switch VMPs, which leads to new waves of bacteremia. And this results in the classic reoccurring fevers of this disease. And the pathogen also evades the complement system using multiple receptor proteins that will inhibit activation. And while it's largely extracellular, it can persist in organs such as the spleen and liver, which allows for relapses to occur. And treatment can also trigger the JHR reaction, which is an intense cytokine storm which is caused by rapid bacterial killing. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the tissue damage and exit. So tissue damage in LBRF results primarily from host inflammatory responses rather than the direct bacterial toxins. So cytokine release during relapses and the JHR reaction contributes to fever and rigors and systemic effects. So organ involvement also can be severe and seen in the spleen, liver, and heart, and sometimes even leading to fatal complications. And the pathogen's exit strategy is through the bloodstream, which allows lice to acquire the infection and then continue this cycle of infection on the host. And basically it combines immune evasion, relapses, and organ damage, making LBRF unique and historically significant due to its epidemic disease. And then here are my resources.